see you.
Nice to see you.
Yes.
Yeah, we met at the person. Yeah, we met at the iftar.
Yes.
Nice to see you.
Hope you're feeling better.
Thank you. Yeah, a little bit. I just went to the doctor's today. Finally, I got an appointment. Ear infection for Mama too, but not contagious. Yeah, take a moment. We're gonna start like 10 minutes. Oh, okay, cool. Awesome. Thank you.
That's a little more pressure, so.
Okay, I love you. To that playground, okay. No, I told him not to because they have their own. You gotta get some of the tabling people. You don't need pictures of me, my love. So,
Good. Yes, I tried one. I tried to eat another soon. Yeah. And you talked to Gladys, right? The owner? Oh, cool. Did you tell her I sent you? Yeah. How much did she give the pupusas to you for? Oh, nice.
Justice Roberts did say something about this.
Yeah.
Let me. I had a board member gave me this jacket, so I'm going to take a quick selfie to show her that I'm wearing her stuff.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gracias.
Just.
Yes, señor.
Yeah, just I'll probably have a little something after.
Okay. If there's something you have.
Yeah, but no worries if there's not. I just ate before I came. Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Hi, I'm Indivisible.
Nice to meet you, Omar Vaquerano.
I'm with Hawaiʻi J20.
Okay.
I also teach at UH, and I teach immigration policy, racism, and nationalism.
Yes.
I'm really interested in what both of you have to say. And of
Thank
course, Liza.
You want to stand up here and you start, and then you can introduce and say since we're co-hosting our nice
I think
men.
if you just did the whole bunch,
Okay,
that would be
okay.
great. Yeah. Oh, but if you could let people know that we have a forum June the 20th.
So this is going to be very good.
Oh, I know. You know, I need to. I have a new comms director. Have you met Sergio?
No?
Oh, okay. I'll introduce. So we have a new comms director, and I just, yeah, I'm always like getting high level stuff. And I always want to go deep, you know. So, but yeah, I think the first question I told her I might take a little bit of time, maybe like more like 15 minutes, but then I don't have much to say on the rest. So
Yeah.
that was first.
And I, same as you, I
Hi.
think.
Hi, I'm Salmah.
Remember you
Yeah.
She was with us.
Yeah, and you too are.
She's my mom.
Your mom. Okay, wow. Yeah, yeah. Thank you, Auntie. Thank you. You look beautiful. I love your jewelry. The coconut and the turquoise.
Coconut is from El Salvador.
Oh, wow.
Artisan.
Wow. Gorgeous. It's really beautiful. It's a blessing to work with your son on this and with us. So.
And I admire your history.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, we all have a little story. Yeah. Yeah.
But nice to see you.
Nice to see you too, Auntie Catalina.
Yes.
Okay, Salmah.
Salmah.
Nice to see you again. Okay, thank you. Oh, okay.
Hey, don't say anything. Let that siren go. We good? We're good? Okay. Aloha! Welcome, folks, to Harris United Methodist Church. My name is Liza Gill, she, her, Aya, and I'm the Executive Director and Refounder of the Hawaiʻi Coalition for Immigrant Rights. And I'm so excited to be co-hosting this event with J20. And Nandita and Gay, you want to wave an arm? Or there we are. It's amazing that we can all come together with these incredible grassroots organizations that have done so much in the first Trump administration and are now out there continuing to do the work that we're all called to love one another, to care for our brothers and sisters, our siblings, and to make sure that everyone is safe in our communities. So I have a few mahalos and some housekeeping before we kick off the evening. And then I will introduce our illustrious panelists here tonight. But first and foremost, where are the lua? The men's lua is around the corner here, and I believe Constancio has the key at the front of the building. For the women's lua, you can go through, right there, the lovely ladies at the door have a lua key for you, and the women's is right through that door and to the left. There continues to be water in the back, and I think a few more pupusas. Other things for housekeeping, I think we're okay. We do have some kiddos playing outside, which is great, but the preschoolers just left. So it should be a little bit quieter. Tonight, we are thankful to have the support of the Hawaiʻi Coalition for Civil Rights. Is Bill here? You want to wave a hand, Bill? There's Bill. The Hawaiʻi Coalition for Civil Rights is reconstituted again from the first Trump administration and is now organizing a number of different organizations here in Hawaii around civil rights. So if that is something that you're interested or you're a part of an organization and you want to connect on that issue, I'm sure Bill would be happy to talk to you. We're also thankful to have the ACLU Hawaii here, both with Salmah, but also with her team members. Sergio, you want to wave your hands? Sergio is the new Community and Engagement Director at ACLU, so if you have any questions from that, I'm sure that Sergio would be happy to talk to you. Indivisible Hawaii, folks. Here. Oh, hi, Lisa, you want to stand up? If you want to connect with Indivisible Hawaii, there is Lisa for you. She's very prompt in her responses, so... And I would be remiss if I didn't say also J20 has another event coming up on June 20th, so you can put it on your calendar now, here at this same spot. It's always great to come back to someplace you know. At 6 p.m., the Solidarity series, United Against Exclusion, Expulsion, and Extermination.
Nice.
So 6 p.m., June 20th, back here at Harris. Okay, so what are we here to talk about tonight? This issue came up and I think has been something that has been on my mind, and I'm sure many of you have read the number of articles or listened to New York Times daily podcast on this particular case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia. We are going to talk some about that, but I think in the end what we want to communicate is how this impacts all of us and why this might be important for Hawaii, the concerns that it raises, and what can we do then. I'm so thankful we had over 90 of you that registered. Many of you left amazing questions. We're going to get to some of those. We also have a mic set up for a little bit later after we have our comments. But I wanted to, before I introduce Omar and Salmah, the Hawaii Coalition for Immigrant Rights is an immigrant-serving advocacy organization representing about 30 immigrant-led and immigrant-serving organizations across the Pai'aina. And this is why we're here. We have two big objectives, policy and power. We try to move policy at the state legislature. We didn't do great this year, but we're hoping to do better next year. We usually have a pretty good track record. I think the year before we were 5 for 5. Is Dr. Agbayani in the room? Many of you know Amy. She is a force to be reckoned with and is our leading lobbyist on that issue, opening doors and making sure that we are promoting the inclusion of all folks, foreign-born and otherwise, here in the state of Hawaii. So that's a lot of the work that we do, but we also are not just interested in policy, we are interested in power. Because when you have big power, you get big ask. As I saw HSTA and Local 5s here, those kinds of asks come when we organize. And so my hope is at the end of this conversation and what you hear, you realize that you are part of building power. That each one of you has so much power to change what happens in this state and what happens in this county, because when you raise an issue, whether that is calling your legislator or writing an op-ed, and I know most of you don't like to be keyboard warriors, but even posting comments sometimes on the articles that come out, combating that vitriol, that adds to our power. And the more power we have, the bigger the ask that we can come with. So that's my whole hope. It's very transactional, and I want to be very transparent because I think that sometimes we get lost in what can we do and what we can do in these moments, and it seems scary, but each one of you is a unit of power, and you can decide how much you want to exercise that. So that is my goal. And this is all a way for us to learn a little bit more so that when we exercise our power, we are clear, we are articulate, we know what we're talking about, and we feel confident in the asks that we make. So, the last little bit before I get to these lovely folks is Kilmar Abrego Garcia's case has been uplifted by a sister organization of HCIR through some of our national partners called CASA. CASA is an immigrant-serving and led organization with 173,000 lifetime members in the tri-state area. And then one of the reasons, just to, like pull back the veil a little bit, one of the reasons why you have seen so much about this case over and over and over again is not just because the case merits understanding and concern, it is because of organizers. It is because of incredible immigration attorneys, and it is about organizations exercising their power and not letting the story die. And so I wanted to speak their name. They did send us a video to show, but unfortunately we're going low tech, except for that we're on live stream right now. But in our notes in the follow-up, we'll send a little video from Kilmar's wife, Jennifer, that she recorded for CASA, so you can hear a little bit directly from the folks that are in this case. So, without further ado, I have two lovely people here with me. One is Omar Arturo Vaquerano Larios, is the founder and managing attorney of Valar Immigration, a boutique immigration law firm helping individuals who seek to successfully navigate the complicated, extremely complicated landscape of the U.S. immigration system. He obtained his first degree in El Salvador before coming to the United States in 2012. Then he pursued a Master's of Law degree at the University of Southern California. Any Trojans in the room? And a Juris Doctor degree at Emory University of Law. He is licensed to practice in New York and El Salvador, and has 6 years of experience in immigration law and with family-based petitions, citizenship, removal defense, employment-based petitions. He provides legal representation and advice to clients on various immigration matters, such as visas, asylum, naturalization, deportation, and waivers. And very importantly, he is also a good friend of all of us, a former staff attorney for the Legal Clinic of Pro Bono Legal Service organization here in Hawaii, and is always very quick on the text when I have questions. So mahalo, Omar, gracias for being here. And I only have one quick question for you, which is, how were the pupusas?
They were very good. We have met the owner, Gladys. If you guys haven't checked it out, it's in Waipahu, really great place. They have a lot of good dishes from El Salvador, very worth checking out. Delicious.
Awesome. On a note on that, obviously, I think here in Hawaii, we have an understanding that everybody is a person from a place that has their own culture, but we didn't want to forget that in this moment as well, that this individual that we're talking about tonight, he was a person from a place. And he started his journey to America as a teenager because his mom was being extorted because she ran a pupuseria and she had a little bit of money, and so the gangs tried to take that money from her and threaten her children. And that is why Kilmar first came to the United States. So both we wanted you to try this beautiful food and support the El Salvadoreño community here in Hawaii, but also wanted to make that connection for you to say that something as simple as your mom making pupusas puts you in danger in a place, and that is why we are in some of these situations that we are right now. So, secondly, Salmah Rizvi is the executive director of the ACLU of Hawaii, bringing a strong background in civil rights law, national security, and policy. Before leading ACLU Hawaii, Rizvi served for nearly a decade at the U.S., she looks very young, she was great, U.S. Departments of State and Defense, where she specialized in high-level intelligence work and became the first chair of the Department of Defense's Islamic Cultural Employee Resource Group. She later transitioned to law, working as a litigation associate at Robes and Gray LLP and clerking for federal judge, maybe one here in Hawaii, on both the U.S. Court of Appeals and U.S. District Court. Rizvi's legal advocacy spans houseless rights, religious freedom, LGBTQIA plus rights, racial justice, immigrant protections, and more. She earned her JD from NYU Law School, an MS from Georgetown School of Foreign Service, and a BA from Johns Hopkins. A Paul and Daisy Soros Fellow and Truman Scholar, Rizvi is a community organizer and a spiritual leader. Born in Indonesia to a Pakistani father and a Guyanese mother, she lives here in Honolulu with her husband and children, Exhibit A out the window, where she continues to advance civil liberties and equity across Hawaii, and I'm always glad to see her at preschool drop-off and pick-up. So welcome, Salmah.
Thank you so much.
Okay, we're not gonna dance around it at the beginning. So, Salmah, are we in a constitutional crisis? You have 2 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Liza. Thank you so much, Omar. It's beautiful to share space with both of you all, and thank you for spending your evening with us today to talk a little bit about the law, a little bit about civil rights. It's an honor to be in this community and to be living in Hawaii, stewarded for generations by Native Hawaiians. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing space. And again, Sergio, thank you for being here, our brand new Community Engagement Director, as well as Aaron, who is our legal fellow. Thank you, Aaron. Also, I wanted to thank my team, a couple members, for being here. And to answer that question, I'll say it's complicated. The American Civil Liberties Union, we try to maintain a strong legal voice, and before we can jump to any legal conclusions, such as calling the State of the Union as one in a constitutional crisis, we really have to examine what's happening. So while the president might be taking steps towards a constitutional crisis, and we might be on the brink or the precipice of a constitutional crisis, I don't believe we're there yet, and I'm going to walk you through it. I'm going to take a little bit of time, I told Liza, to answer this first question about constitutional crisis. And I'll take way less time on the other questions, but I just wanted to empower everybody, particularly because in this moment there is so much fear, and it's very easy and it's very popular to sort of, call something a constitutional crisis, or to have our hands in the air, or be in a moment of hysteria. There's so much flying around. And really, I'm hoping that my remarks today can ground us a little bit in the law, and empower us a little bit to realize that there are still tools that we have. All of you, like Liza said, each one of you is a unit of power, and we have to exercise those tools. So I'm hoping the comments will be a little bit empowering, and I'll end with a little bit of how you can engage in this question of constitutional crisis. So to begin, as you know, the United States Constitution makes clear, actually within its first articles, a separation of powers. So Article 1 talks about how the legislature shall have the powers guaranteed vested in Congress, which consists of a Senate and a House of Representatives. It then says that the executive power to carry out what the legislature says shall go to the President of the United States. And then the judicial power to kind of watch the executive branch shall be vested in one Supreme Court, as well as inferior courts that the Congress deems need to be established. So our Constitution itself sets up this beautiful separation of powers, and it was intended, our forefathers of the framers of the Constitution had intended for this to lead to an equitable system of justice, so that no one branch of government could supersede another, and that there were these checks. It's difficult when we have a president like that, the president that we have now, to sort of ensure that those checks and balances are working properly. And it's no secret, ACLU is 100% a nonpartisan organization, and we stick to that. But it is no secret that our House, our Senate, our Supreme Court, and our President's office are stacked a certain way with a certain political agenda that they're pushing forward. So what we're really seeing in this moment is that the judicial branch is intended to safeguard people's due process, meaning that the executive branch can't just come in and do whatever it wants to do. The judicial branch says, no, if you want to take action, if you're going to engage in depriving somebody of life, liberty, or the pursuit of happiness or their property, you have to do so in a way that gives them due process under the law. And what's happening in this moment that is leading to a constitutional crisis is that the president is invoking certain tools, and he's trying to create loopholes to bypass due process. And the one that's really interesting for Kilmar's case, and which we'll talk about kind of in depth tonight, is the Alien Enemies Act. So the Alien Enemies Act, and I'm sure you all have read about it in the news, is an authority that was derived from the 1700s. And so this authority, it gives the president the authority to apprehend, restrain, and remove non-citizens it deems to be alien enemies without an opportunity for judicial review. So this is supposed to be used during wartime in a case of an emergency where, you know, the president is supposed to be able to move with expediency in order to protect us here on U.S. soil. But what we're seeing is that in order to carry out his mass deportation agenda, President Trump is evoking the Alien Enemies Act in this critical way. I think what's interesting about the act is that it also applies to an invasion or a predatory incursion. And so what they're saying is that you know, some of officials are saying that arrivals of non-citizens from Venezuela are deemed automatically to be causing an invasion or being predatory on U.S. soil, which is just not true, as we'll talk about a little later. So many people who are coming to our border are seeking safety and protection and not seeking to engage in warfare. Also, TDA, the Venezuela gang, is deemed sufficiently akin to a foreign nation or a government, is the government's argument. So that's why they're able to say, well, hey, you know, we are at war with this gang, which also makes no sense, you know. And so they're trying to use these loopholes in how they're looking at this act. And it's been happening, you know, the interpretation of the Alien Enemies Act has been happening across states and in different jurisdictions and different courthouses to really examine, can the president actually use this act? And the last time this wartime authority was invoked was during World War II. As you all well know, living here in Hawaii, leading up to the internment of non-citizens and eventually the internment program targeting Japanese Americans. As we know, this was a shameful moment that impacted families across Hawaii and the continent. And in 2018, it was only then that the Supreme Court finally recognized that Korematsu versus the United States that allowed for that to occur was no longer precedential. And so this weekend, there's so many cases. I'll talk a little bit about, you know, the intricacies of the cases, because it can be confusing as you're having the Supreme Court adjudicate on one question about this act, and then you're having district courts adjudicate about other questions on this act. But it is important to know, and I hope we can all celebrate, that this weekend the Supreme Court did temporarily block the Trump administration from deporting any Venezuelan men held in Blue Bonnet Detention Center in northern Texas under the Alien Enemies Act, and ACLU successfully filed these emergency appeals. So we are winning. We are winning, we are winning, we are winning. When the ACLU, our partner affiliates, ACLU National, they've been filing these cases around this issue of the Alien Enemies Act across the country. And what we're seeing is that judges are still willing to engage in issuing a temporary restraining order on the president's actions. And, you know, we need to celebrate in the moments that we can celebrate for the times ahead in this marathon that we have in front of us during the next 4 years. To talk a little bit about a few cases that are important was, I'm sure you've heard about the U.S. District Court Judge Emmanuel Boasberg, who essentially he had clients before him, and their lawyers had said that their clients were not part of the TDA gang. And despite that, and despite evidence supporting that, President Trump still ordered those same clients to be deported under the Aliens Enemy Act, and they were on a plane. I'm sure you all heard about this. And they were told, okay, well, if you're on the plane, turn them around. The plane kept going, they landed, and now there's a fight to bring those folks back. What happened was that judge at the time said that the president could not use the Aliens Enemies Act in this way, but because he was sitting in DC and these folks were in Texas, the Supreme Court said that judge did not have the authority to adjudicate upon the matter. So that could have been one case where we're looking at contempt of court. Because when we're talking about constitutional crisis, we're really talking about what breaks down the separation of powers. And what can break it down is when the president is defying a court order. So this is one case where we saw, hey, the president is defying this court order. We have a constitutional crisis on our hand. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. Again, the Supreme Court had said he didn't have jurisdiction to adjudicate on aspects of it. But still, despite the jurisdictional issue, that judge still believes that he can hold the president in contempt. And so now there's legal questions. If the case itself shouldn't have been in the court in the first place, can you have a president be held in contempt if that issue is moot now? And so now we're seeing things happen in an unprecedented way. As far as Kilmar's case, which is, I want to note, is not an ACLU case. The U.S. District Court Maryland, U.S. District Court of Maryland Judge Paula Zenas, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing her last name. She said that she had ordered and saying that Kilmar needs to be facilitated back to return to the United States. And she hasn't received, any information about what's happening. What are the steps for facilitation? What are the steps to ensure that Kilmar is able to return? And this, too, is she's seeing this inaction is also being seen as defiance of a court order. So those are two cases in which we're looking at potentially us going towards a constitutional crisis because the president is potentially defying court orders. And so she's contemplating holding the president in contempt, but has not yet. There are a few problems, however, in trying to hold the president in contempt. And this is where the constitutional crisis and the whole system breaks down, folks, here. So, as you know, the president has certain presidential immunities. You can't, essentially, those immunities prevent the president from being prosecuted or criminalized in many ways. Excuse me. So, that's one issue, the presidential immunities issues. The other issue is that unlike state courts, federal courts cannot enforce their own orders. They depend on U.S. Marshal Services to help enforce their orders. And this is a law enforcement agency that sits within the Department of Justice, which sits where? Under the executive branch, controlled by who? President Trump. So you have sort of this issue, and the big crisis is if a judge says, you have to make President Trump abide by this order that I've issued, and the marshals go after Trump or any of his officials really to enforce compliance. And if Trump says, well, you can't make me, because he orders the U.S. Marshal Services to stand down, where do we go from there? That's the million-dollar question, right? How can we ensure the checks and balances? But there are some remedies. First of all, you can be held in criminal contempt, and that requires sort of a higher standard of, there has to sort of be kind of a willful disregard and rather just like a regular, like you have to intentionally, thank you, baby girl. Thank you so much, Sakina. I love you. And another issue is that, so then we have civil contempt orders, which could potentially apply, and that carries certain fines and includes asset seizure. So that's one. There's another interesting article that I just recently read yesterday by a professor at Rutgers Law School. His name is David Knoll. And he notes to the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, Rule 4.1. And that rule says that process, essentially for compliance of a court order, must be served by a United States Marshal or Deputy Marshal or, quote, by a person specially appointed for that purpose. So now we're thinking, well, do the federal rules of civil procedures actually contemplate this? Can judges enact or maybe hire or contract a third party appointed marshal for the purpose of compliance? Professor Knoll goes on to say that to be clear, a court that appointed someone other than the marshals to enforce a civil contempt order would be breaking new ground. So, legal theorists and scholars are thinking about ways, everybody, no matter what you're doing, if you're a lawyer in the street, if you're an activist in the street, if you're a professor, in the classroom, everyone is trying to figure out right now how we can save our democracy. And I think, as Cecilia Wang, who's ACLU National's legal director, said, the power is really in the hands of the people through legislative demands. Because when it comes to it, and when it comes to this constitutional crisis, we really have one route, which is impeachment and removal from office. And so I leave you with that, folks. A lot to kind of chew on, but I hope that was helpful and informative. Thank you.
Mahalo, Salmah. And I think that it raises a lot of questions, and I think it's as we've talked about, the better we are informed on the situation, the more seriously we can be taken when things do cross that line. So I think that's very important. This particular situation involves two countries, the United States and El Salvador. And since we are lucky enough to have a practicing immigration attorney here in Hawaii from El Salvador, Omar and I have been talking about this situation basically since the case came up. And I kept bothering him, like, please, would you come and explain to us why El Salvador and what is happening there and why we should care about this and that this is concerning. So, because our questions are very plain, why El Salvador? And what agreement does the United States have with El Salvador that is creating this situation?
Yes. Well, first of all, I want to thank everybody for being here. I want to thank Liza for the invitation. Salmah, I'm honored to be here, and I wanted to congratulate you on the efforts and the excellent results that you're producing in the ongoing litigation. To kind of, we have to find ways, right, to combat this. The efforts of the current administration, which are, needless to say, seeking to undermine a lot of the institutions that have been established over time. And although I do agree that we have to be careful in the words that we choose, but we also have to be mindful and watchful, and we have to act, because if we just oftentimes in history, complacency, not necessarily complacency, but just assuming that things will eventually not reach a certain point, can sometimes catch us off guard. And I think ACLU plays, and other organizations nationwide play a pivotal role in ensuring that we're keeping the government in check. There are, as Salmah said, systems in place that are designed to do this, but systems often fail. And when that happens is when additional action is needed. I wanted to, before I get into the question, just do a little bit of follow-up on something that Salmah mentioned, which I think is important to understand in context of the removal proceedings, right? And what that means, the Alien Enemies Act, and what the government tried to do is very important to understand what the process is normally like, right? So there is a law that defines, in general terms, when a person can be here in the U.S., when they can come in, when under certain conditions or under certain circumstances, the person should be formerly known as deportation, but now removal, right? Removed from this country for various reasons, right? And a lot of people often think that it's necessary for a person to be a criminal for this to happen. That's not the case, right? Simply being here without being within a period of authorized stay is enough. Now, there is a system in place that's designed so that individuals who are being charged with a removability, meaning that they're in the process of being removed, they have an opportunity to present their case to a judge and let the judge know why perhaps they shouldn't be removed. And this can be for various reasons. Maybe they have family here, there are certain conditions back home that prevent them or should prevent the government from removing these individuals. And the opportunity of presenting this to the judge to avoid this result is what is of utmost importance here. And this is exactly what the President's action sought to deprive these individuals of doing. Right? So it is important to understand that even though there may be a suspicion or allegations that a person may have engaged in conducts that would perhaps justify their removal, we have to ensure that we give them the opportunity, right, to present their case. And I can think of multiple scenarios of situations where we could end up in an absurd result of individuals being removed that should have never been removed. So I think that's where ACLU's work and all these organizations and us as attorneys, our job is important to ensure that individuals who should not be removed are not removed, and that they're allowed their day in court, right? So I think that was a great way of presenting it, and thank you for that. So I will, to answer Liza's question, I will necessarily take you down a little bit of a history, right, to understand why these sort of relationships between governments happen in the first place, right? So I take you back all the way to 1911. Why? Because historically, before, with the criminal justice system, one of the very, I would say, first problems that they encountered was what happens when we cross international borders or even state lines, right? So it's kind of difficult for when a state, meaning a country, right, has an interest in pursuing criminal charges against an individual, and this person is outside of their reach, right? Because a country can't just come in and grab somebody against their will and take him back to, because that would be a violation of a country's sovereignty, right? So because of this, there were a series of treaties that were signed by all different nations that would ensure that when a nation has an interest to bring a person that is currently in another country into the country so that they can process them because perhaps they have been convicted in that country already, or perhaps they're just being accused. So the other country signs this treaty to make sure that they facilitate and allow this person to come back into the country. But here's the important thing, right? Even back then, the whole idea behind this is to allow the person to come back in and face due process, right? That's the bedrock of this principle. Is this person's, yes, going to be taken from wherever they are, but they're going to be eventually put before a judge. They're going to be perhaps put before a jury of their peers, and they will be allowed an opportunity to defend themselves so that they can prove whether the allegations that are being levied against them are true or not, right? So this has been the case since 1911. Of course, this has evolved over time. Early 2000s, I can think of another example. There was a series of treaties that were signed between Central American nations and Dominican Republic, the CAFTA treaties. And even though completely unrelated, they were more focused with international trade and facilitating trade, but they also contained a lot of provisions that would seek to facilitate the cooperation between the nations in a multitude of different realms, including the enforcement of laws, not just criminal laws, but also immigration laws. Right, so going back to the topic of deportation, right? What happens when the judge decides, yes, I'm going to deport this person? The standard is this person is going to be deported to their country of origin, right? And for the person to be deported to a country of origin, a lot of things need to happen, right? The country of origin needs to facilitate that by providing the person travel documents, by ensuring that the person is transferred safely back into the country, and if there's any process that needs to be taken once they're there, to also make sure that that happens. Right? So in that sense, the other country's cooperation is pivotal. It's essential. Because even though the U.S. Immigration judge determines that a person is deportable, if they cannot actually execute the deportation, the person should not be deported. Right? There has to be some form of process to be followed. Now, it's not the case that the person can only, and here's where El Salvador comes to play, right? The law doesn't say that the person can only be deported to their country. Right? That is the default, right? The person gets sent back to their country. However, they can be sent to a different country. However, this is, of course, based on sovereignty, subject to a lot of restrictions, one of them being that the other country needs to be willing to accept this person, which typically doesn't happen, right? A country is not going to want to take in just somebody because the U.S. says, hey, I'm going to send you the 500 people, take them in. Historically, this has never happened. This is actually something that I had never seen or read about, and we're now seeing it happen, play out in real life, right? So the government's effort, why El Salvador? Because they volunteered, right? The U.S. has an interest right now, which is to make good on their promises of mass deportations. He ran on that platform. And now he faces certain challenges, which is that certain countries are not willing to accept, under certain conditions, the return of their nationals, right? So the way that they're circumventing this, or trying at least, is finding a third nation that is willing to take these individuals so that they can send them out at the speed that they want to do it, right? So that is the context on which this was born. Now, I also mentioned something that's very important, which is that the whole relationship and sending people out had a foundation on due process and respecting constitutional rights. And we have to necessarily talk about what the constitutional situation in El Salvador is right now to understand what the potential risks are of somebody being taken out of the U.S. into El Salvador, whether they're Salvadorians or foreigners, right? So I'm going to take you down a little timeline, right? And I don't know this by heart, so I'm going to read, so I apologize. But I will go walk you through a timeline of how the situation unfolded in El Salvador, which came from a situation we had a constitution that was written in 1983, one of the most modern constitutions in the world, very, very complex. It had all the checks and balances, all the nice things that we would want to have in the constitution, and it worked. I mean, El Salvador was, it was a little bit, there was a lot of corruption, there was violence from the gangs, which, interestingly enough, is precisely evidence of the system working, because the gangs were born from individuals who were residing in Los Angeles, Salvadorians, right? They came to the U.S. and were persecuted by gangs in L.A. They made a gang of their own, and eventually they ended up being deported. El Salvador facilitated the deportation of these individuals to El Salvador, and then they proliferated there as cancer in a nation that was recovering from a 10-year bloody civil war. So now, fast forward, right? From 1991 to 2019, Bukele gets elected as president. Then the COVID pandemic hits, right? Everything is a mess. In February of 2020 is the first little sign that we had of a constitutional crisis in El Salvador, right? Bukele was trying to pass a measure to a budget for security measures, and the Legislative Assembly, as it's their job to do, was deliberating, right, to make sure that everything was above board. And Bukele ordered a group of a military contingent to walk into the Legislative Assembly, and they all, with their rifles, stood in there to pressure the Legislative Assembly to rule and to decide in a way that was favorable to him. At the time, people said, no, don't worry, right? Everything is fine. The Constitution's there. There's the Supreme Court. We should be fine. However, in May of 2021, the people in El Salvador, and here's where the first problem happened. And I think we haven't, as I agree with Salmah, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but we could very easily, right? May 2021, the people of El Salvador in the midterm elections give Bukele's party a legislative supermajority, which, according to the Constitution in El Salvador, allows them to pass pretty much any law that they want without the opposition being able to do much about it, right? So this was, of course, it was completely legal. Like, it was elections. People were tired of what happened in the past, and they decided to vote that way to see what would happen, right? That was the whole idea. Let's see if somebody comes here and does something different, right? So that was May 2021. Same month, May 2021, Bukele removes the duly elected Attorney General from office, and he also removes the Supreme Court justices, every single one, that had been elected by the College of Attorneys following the procedure in El Salvador, and he handpicked them. Okay? And so, in essence, he turned a check into a tool. He basically was able to circumvent the systems that were already in the Constitution to further consolidate his power. Right? So the new Supreme Court rules shortly after that Bukele can seek re-election, even though the Constitution expressly prohibits re-election. And the reason why the Constitution expressly prohibited re-election is because El Salvador came from a history of dictatorships. The Civil War erupted partially combating communism, but also because they were erupting from a situation of dictatorships over the years. So at that point, the new Supreme Court said, oh, we're going to give a new interpretation to the very clear words that said you can never be reelected as a president, and we're going to say that you can if at least 6 months go by, which is ridiculous. It's a ridiculous interpretation. It's an embarrassing thing to say to somebody who went to law school to give that interpretation of the Constitution, but I invite you to look into that and read it. In addition, June 2021, the new Attorney General starts prosecuting political opposition, right? So he puts very respectable members of the opposing political party in prison. They're still in jail to this day for financial crimes. Very petty how he did it, but anyway, we'll talk about that some other day. March 2022, a state of emergency is declared. This is where everything went downhill completely, right? There was a wave of violence, and in response to the wave of violence, in order to stop it, he said, we're going to temporarily, this is 2022, suspend constitutional rights to allow us to incarcerate all these gang members that are terrorizing individuals, right? So what did they suspend, right? The big question. Freedom of association and assembly, privacy in communications, due process protections, which include right to be informed of the reason for an arrest, a right for us to remain silent, and to have legal representation, suspended. Habeas corpus and the requirement to present detainees before a judge between 72 hours, out the window. During this time, mass incarcerations took place. Most of them, were individuals who were gang members. A lot of them were not, right? This was in 2022. January 2023, they built the infamous Secot mega prison complex is opened. Most gang members are relocated in there. And then same month, Bukele announces his official bid for re-election after having joked with the idea for over 3 years. So at that point, it became real. What had been something that we, at least people said, no, he's never gonna do it. And he ended up doing it, right? He said he was, and we have to take it, these individuals' words for their, especially when they show this, right? August 2023, Alejandro Muchant, former national security advisor to Bukele, was arrested, accused of leaking sensitive information, incarcerated without facing a judge. He died while imprisoned, allegedly due to a stroke, but however, his body was never returned to his family members until weeks later. All his organs had been removed. His body showed signs of torture. February 2024, Bukele ran a second term, and he was elected. Questionable whether or not it was a due process, but at least, you know, he was elected. He did run, and now he is serving against the Constitution. He's an unconstitutional president, but at this point, he controls the Legislative Assembly. He removed, normally the Legislative Assembly had 84 seats, and there were still a couple of opposition members left at that point, but because he controls the Supreme Court, he controls the Legislative Assembly, he decided to just take out the extra 24 that weren't from his party. So now there's only one member of the Legislative Assembly that is not part of his party. So we are in a situation in El Salvador, a true constitutional crisis, right? When people are afraid. I myself am afraid. One of the questions that I asked Liza today was, is this going to be, is it going to be online? Because why? I have family there still. I have connections, and I fear for my safety because I feel that I'm not in a position to speak out against a president that holds this kind of power, right? So why El Salvador? Well, he saw an opportunity, right? Bukele is a power-hungry individual, and he sees the opportunity here to ingrace himself to the U.S. government and to give them a solution to a problem that is perhaps the one thing that he has been able to deliver promises on. And he's just giving him the opportunity, right, to be able to circumvent the issues that have prevented him from carrying out the objectives that he had. So I know this is a long answer, but I think it required a lot of context to understand why, right? Because it's very random that just a random country in Central America, why Venezuelans, what would be the possible interest that Bukele could have in accepting this? It's a simple situation of power and a desire to ingratiate himself and perpetuate himself, which very likely he will at this point, right? So that is the context of the situation. I know I went over a little bit, but you know, it was important.
Well, thank you for that, Omar. And just to put a clarifying point on that, many of the folks that are there, many of them have been incarcerated by Bukele himself. It's not just folks that have been disappeared from the United States or mostly Venezuelans, but one of the issues is the fact that Venezuela will not receive folks back into their country, and so we need a place to put them, and so El Salvador is a willing third country to be able to hold those individuals.
Yes, and also I forgot to mention one more very important thing. All the individuals that were detained in 2022 during that first round of incarcerations have yet to face trial, and they're still incarcerated. Yeah.
So when we think, as we have been watching the case of Kilmar Garcia unfold, what does it show us, and I'll give this to Omar first, but then Salmah, if you want to jump in on it. What does it show us about the state of our due process protection for immigrants in this country?
So I think going back to what the ideal scenario, right? We want to make sure that those individuals who have the ability to fight their case should be given that opportunity, right? In the case of Kilmar, I think it's important to understand his context, his own personal circumstances that led to where he is now. Liza mentioned he came with his mother at an early age. I don't know much about his early life and what may have happened at that point. But what I do know is that at some point he was put before a judge, right, to precisely determine whether or not he should be removed, right? And when a person gets removed, there are very few ways that we can fight this, and one of them is, to try to argue that if you get sent back, your life could be at risk of persecution, right? So this is this stems from treaties that seek to protect refugees here in the U.S., specifically the asylum-seeking system. So there are various levels in which one can obtain this. My understanding is that he did initially try to argue asylum, but based on eligibility requirements, more to do with time than anything else, he didn't meet them. But he did, and this is very important to understand, why he was here. He was granted withholding of removal, right? And withholding of removal is a form of relief that prevents individuals from being sent back. Reason why being is that same situation, right? A scenario of a very high chance that if the person gets sent back to their home country, they will be subject to persecution, possibly torture, based on the Convention Against Torture, or death, right? So asylum is a very, very difficult process to obtain, contrary to what many people think. And when a person is not able to obtain asylum because of these limitations, there is a next level of protection that's called withholding of removal, which people also think it's easy, but it's actually harder, right? Because if the standard that we need to prove for asylum is here, for us to get withholding of removal, the standard is here, right? In asylum, we need to show some probability that if the person gets sent back, they're going to be subject to persecution. For a person to be granted withholding of removal, the judge needs to be convinced that it's more likely than not that if the person gets sent back, they will be subject to torture. So it has an even higher standard. And when he faced that judge and he faced that decision, the judge decided that he should not be deported. Even though he was deportable, he should not be deported, because if he was sent back to El Salvador, the chances that he was going to suffer were more likely to happen than not, right? So now we have a situation where, what his situation, so many things to talk about. So first of all, the way that ICE is operating, right? They're rounding individuals up. They're violating their constitutional rights before they even get to the point where they can present their case to the judges, right? Everybody has constitutional rights. It doesn't matter if we're citizens or residents, right? And in terms of legal proceedings, we have the right to remain silent. We have the right against being searched on our bodies or property or our vehicles without a judicial warrant, right? We also have the right to be represented by an attorney. We have the right to a due process, speedy process, anyway, we have a lot of constitutional rights, and these constitutional rights need to be respected by the authorities. Right? And the way this plays out with ICE is that if they will be going in and breaking into a person's house or into their vehicles and detaining them, then they need to make sure that all the procedures are followed. Right? They need to have a judicial warrant to be able to go into the house and detain an individual. If they're going to break into if they're going to take them out of their vehicle, they also need a warrant. If they want to search your trunk, they need a warrant. And right now we're observing ICE individuals who are outside people's vehicles and are asking them to come out, and when people don't comply, they're breaking the glasses, they're opening the doors, and they're dragging the people out. So this is a violation of people's constitutional rights, and all in the efforts of maintaining the president's agenda of mass deportations. Kilmar was among individuals that was detained in one of these efforts, right, to detain people who are subject to removal. And he is the best example of procedure not being followed, right? Because if it was a simple matter of opening his A file and seeing that this person had been ordered by a judge that he should not be deported. So understanding that, they brush it off as administrative error, but they don't really say what it is. It means you deported somebody that a judge said that you should not deport. So it's very important to understand that, right? And in the face of that, they sent him back, and after that we have seen a lot of conversation on the topic, whether or not he has merit or not, beyond the question, right? Because let's not forget, even people who are accused of crimes here in the U.S., they have a right to defend themselves. They have a right to not be incarcerated before it is shown that they are guilty beyond reasonable doubt. It's not the same principle all the time, but the due process principle applies here. The fact that Kilmar is in El Salvador right now is evidence that we have failed. The system, at least with respect to immigration, has failed. Right now, honestly, I don't have much hope for him, because at this point it turns into sovereignty, right? He's a Salvadorian national under the jurisdiction of El Salvador, which is his country of birth. There is no legal way that they could force the Salvadorian government to turn him in, right? So where is he now? He's not in Secot anymore, but is he incarcerated? Has he faced criminal charges? Possibly not. He probably will not. There is no way that the government will be able to make sure that this person is given his day in court. And my opinion is that by doing this, by sending a person over to a country where currently there are no ways of guaranteeing a person's constitutional rights, the government is being complicit in sending people over to be subject to torture, to be subject to inhumane treatment. And that is what I think is the importance, right? And what we have to highlight in Kilmar's case, sadly.
Yeah, and and thankfully we are seeing members of the Senate going down and visiting and checking on his welfare at this point in time. But I think important to Omar's point on that is that the executive branch has stopped arguing the merits of the case and now are arguing the merits of the person. And I think that is something that we all have to be very mindful of. Because the qualities of an individual are not what determines whether they have due process or not. And any one of us could also be dragged through and picked apart and put in the media in a certain light with AI generated images and cast aspersions upon. So I think that is something that, if the conversation devolves to the qualities of the individual and not the protections of the process, then I think we have to take a step back. Salmah, did you have anything you wanted to say on that?
Yeah, sure. So, I think as you all know, that we all have a right to due process. It's derived again from the U.S. Constitution. In 1791, the Fifth Amendment had held that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. Then in 1868, the 14th Amendment said that it extends the protection of due process to states as well, stating, no state shall deprive any person of federal liberty or of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. So the Fifth Amendment is sort of for federal law, if you want to break it down that way, and the 14th Amendment for state law. But either way, due process, it applies in a number of contexts. And what we're seeing is that there has been an erosion of due process. Some examples of due process include the right to a fair trial, the right to notice, to know what you're actually being convicted of, like, well, what am I in trouble for? Why am I getting picked up? The right to an attorney. You don't have to speak to authorities without your attorney present. You have that right. And a right to, when you are accused of something, in most cases, you do have a right to a fair hearing, as Omar was saying. And so what's happening is that, vulnerable folks in marginalized communities are getting picked up, and then the administration is bypassing due process completely, and not giving people their day in court. That's what we're looking at here with due process. We are not giving folks, particularly in this moment with President Trump's mass deportation agenda, he is not allowing people to have a fair hearing. And this erosion, I think is really leading to some basic fundamental freedoms that all Americans should be able to enjoy, such as we should all be innocent until proven guilty. Yet we're bypassing whole processes, and people who are not guilty of anything are getting thrown in torture chambers, essentially. Like, this is the world that we're living in. And so there's a true erosion here. And I think there's also what you'll see by attorneys of the administration right now, and those who have chosen to stay with the Department of Justice in this moment and continue to defend the department's and the administration's actions. You'll see that those attorneys are sometimes using technical aspects of the law to bypass due process, which I think, as a practice, having litigated for so many years, I think that is the scariest thing. To see this profession and to see lawyers who, in order to maintain their jobs at the Department of Justice, or in order to, that's their livelihood, they're saying, okay, well, let me use these technicalities and let me create creative ways to erode due process so I can support the federal government and its agenda. And that is so, it's like, as lawyers, we took an oath. We took an oath to protect the law, and that's not just the law and all of its technicalities, but the spirit of the law, which is completely eroded. And there's so much of this distance between any one of us and real people who are facing real consequences every day. I do believe that there's often a distance too between the adjudicators, that people come before judges who are handing down significant sentences, or judges who obviously know that they might send an asylum seeker back home to a place where they might most likely will get killed, but they're finding technicalities in the law to say, sorry, we can't grant this, because again, it helps their numbers. It's part of this system. There are all these systematic abuses that are leading to this erosion of due process, and the administrative errors one is one that we're seeing, whoopsies, whoops, and it's just, it's really frustrating, to say the least, to work in the legal system today. I will say though that, again, ACLU, we are extremely nonpartisan, and I would be remiss if I didn't remind people that our due process rights have been eroding for years. This is not just starting with Trump. We have slowly been paving the way for due process to be eroding in this way. And the Biden administration also engaged in a number of tactics that eroded due process as well. So we saw, under Trump 1, we saw family separation, we're seeing it now, fast track deportation. But, Biden too had the continuation of Title 42, limiting the entry of immigrants for public health concerns. And this was, then there's also obviously surveillance and technology. There were a number of policies under President Biden that, we could argue prevented due process from taking place when it came to certain criminal proceedings. And we're seeing that expansion by Trump, the expansion of tools with minimal oversight, that is also leading to the erosion. And then most importantly is that whenever the administration, and Biden did this and Trump did this and our beautiful black president Obama had done this too, is when they say national security and they wave that flag, they're always looking at those compelling national interests and weighing it against an individual's life of due process. And so I think we also have to, ask ourselves, how are we being socialized right now by the media? As we saw, Biden, when it came to due process, and how is due process taking place, not just in the legal system and in the courts, but in our communities, in our places of work? How are we self-policing each other? How are certain corporations also engaging in letting people go, or, removing people because they might be an immigrant or they don't want to get in trouble with federal dollars? Like, where is the resistance there? And, we saw this particularly when it came to Biden, and when it came to when it comes to First Amendment rights and the freedom of speech and the freedom of protest against Israel's genocide of Palestinians, we saw the erosion happening then in certain cases, and we saw that the United States Department of Justice should have stood up, but they didn't. They didn't rein in those abuses that were happening by state powers, by states, against vulnerable students. Some of our youngest amongst us who are entering this system because of their advocacy on that issue. And so I think it's important to also pay attention of kind of what I call micro due process. When it spills over, when you see state forces and state systems engaging in the erosion of due process, and then when you start seeing corporations doing the same, nonprofit institutions doing the same, silencing us to speak our truth and really lean into that. And so, it's going to take all of us to sort of stand up against that erosion.
Thank you, Salmah. And I'm gonna skip forward just maybe very, very briefly, Omar. We can talk about the right to asylum, and I think this is something that a lot of folks are somewhat familiar with. They've seen it around or heard about the conversation that all these people abuse asylum, and what are our obligations to folks from an international treaty perspective. You have like 2 minutes on that.
Right. So I'm going to focus on the highlights. So as Liza mentioned, it derives from international law, right? Nations often give protection to individuals who are seeking refuge, right? The U.S. implements that in its own way through the law. It sets a series of requirements, right? So we are seeking to enforce that treaty. The law sets its own requirements, and this is where usually where we see the majority of the injustices, right? Because oftentimes we end up denying cases of people who are truly trying to escape very serious situations back home, but because they don't really quite meet the very specific definition of asylum, they don't get that granted, right? And I'm not going to bore you with the requirements, but I can tell you that less than 10% of asylum applications get granted. It's a very, very, very low rate of success that individuals have, and I can't tell you how many stories I hear from colleagues, even here in Honolulu. Very recently, an individual was deported back to his home country, and he was killed no more than 2 weeks after he got there, murdered by a client of mine. Actually got murdered very recently as well. So these things happen, right? And the problem here is we need to make sure that we have a system that is compassionate, and that it seeks that it represents the spirit of the treaties that it seeks to emulate. If we restrict it too much and we don't apply it correctly, we also don't want to go the opposite way either, right? It has to be a tool that is used for the purpose that it's created. But currently, that is the reality of the asylum seeking process. You have to meet certain requirements, and if you don't get it, right?
Yeah. And most of those requirements were a direct result post World War II and configured on, before we had non-state actors that could perpetuate violence, before we really considered gender violence as an issue. And so many of those, when folks come fleeing gang violence or gender violence, and that their country is not going to stand up and protect them from that gender violence, that is not considered. There had been slowly more and more case law expanding that and retracting it. But that is, for that context, it was now we're trying to fit people into within the framework of something that was created very much in a post-World War II mentality that just doesn't exist at this point in time.
Yeah, and I wanted to add to that, some people might ask, what is international law, and, what does it have to do with constitutional law? And actually, the Article 4, Clause 2, it's called the Supremacy Clause of the U.S. Constitution, clearly says that the Constitution and the law of the United States shall be made in pursuance thereof. All treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound by it. And so really, these treaties that we signed on to should have supremacy. Like, we should really, really care about when we make international covenants. And it was actually we did ratify the 1967 protocol relating to refugees, which then allowed us to incorporate our law on asylum and withholding of removal, and then later on CAT. And so it's just, we don't respect that anymore. And you see very little litigation that's really engaging, I feel like, the supremacy clause and the power that we should have in international treaties, and you see that President Trump has already disengaged with the United Nations Human Rights Council, has ordered sanctions against the chief prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, and has threatened to commit ethnic cleansing in Gaza openly, a sitting president. You know, at least it's, I mean, it wasn't high, like the last president kind of hid that fact, and this president is just openly saying it, but these are really stark, you know, these are really huge abuses in international law and our standing in the world right now. And so it's all connected, you know,
Yeah.
It's all intersectional.
So that being said, and here we are, 6:23. We're going to have some time for question and answers, but just as a kind of a last comments here from our panelists, we've now explored the situation. We are on the cusp of a constitutional crisis. It's kind of like a yay or nay every day, whether we're headed.
We're winning. Whoa,
Well, no, yes. So, you know, stay on your seats for that one. We are watching the serious erosion and abrogation of due process, whether that is the Alien Exclusion or the Enemy Aliens Act, or it is the lack of use of warrants, the expedited removal of individuals. And for here in Hawaii, there have been numerous cases of individuals who have been detained, had no opportunity to talk to an attorney, were put on a plane, and were back in their home country within 3 days. And so this is not something that is happening elsewhere. We can talk about some of the situations that happened yesterday and last night and this morning across the state. And then we have extrajudicial mega prison torture chamber in another country that we are both actively funding and have a backroom deal. I think everybody who watched that meeting with Bukele and Trump and saw them, you know, wink and nod that this person would never be returned back to the United States understood the kind of arrangement that we have. What does that mean for us here in Hawaii? What are the things? There's so much noise. What parts of this should we be watching and paying attention to, and specifically pushing back on?
Well, I think, you know, just to, when you were talking about that kind of broing out moment between the, you know, between these two heads of states, and sort of the, you know, understanding that even innocent folks who are being sent to El Salvador most likely will not be coming back, and they're going to engage in tactics that will prevent due process. I think it's really important to note, you know, despite that happening, and it's very sad, we can't lean into fear. I think that's number one for everybody. I think Hawaii is such a special place insofar as that I really feel that the ethos here is one of resistance. You know, we have a strong Native Hawaiian presence here, and this was formerly the United States essentially helped, as well as Britain, kind of imperial powers helped to colonize and deconstruct another nation that existed here. And so just with that background, we have more awareness on that intersectionality. We are engaging in kind of like fear-mongering or are getting nervous or anxiety or are changing their behaviors in response to what the state is doing. That's exactly what the state wants you to do. Yeah. That is planned. That is exactly how they are trying to, you know, unveil the rest of their Project 2025 agenda. The first aspect being fear. So we have to keep our spirits high. We cannot, no matter what the consequences are, engage in fear. My husband and I, we are often interrogated when we travel overseas and we come back to the States despite having a bunch of little kids. You know, they don't care. It's all about harassment at this point. You know, those engaging in this work will have to experience that. But, you know, your fearlessness in this moment and continue to be part of this moment of resistance is going to help. It's going to help so much in so many ways in the days to come. I also think in the immigration context, just, you know, the values that we share here, just aloha and like hospitality and welcoming. Like, please, when you hear it happening, this anti-immigration rhetoric, push back on it. Don't let it just roll out of one ear and go through the next. When people are saying, you know, well, they don't have their papers, they're here illegally, you know, it serves them right. Push back on that. You know, we are all children, and, you know, many of us here are children of, you know, migration, and we are the products of people who have survived over generations. So why would we, you know, feel like we're holier than thou just because some people processed some papers and other people did not? I think that's important. And I think in the days to come, you know, we're going to have to start earlier. Liza, you know, in the summer and early fall, we'll start thinking about legislative action, because we got to start building blue veils for what we're seeing nationally in the deportation agenda. We have to start helping the legislature. I see Rep. Blvd. Thank you for the hand up. Go ahead.
have to wait till the fall.
Yeah.
We have special sessions. And I want to tell this group here that we need to push now. Because pre-compliance of the state is not acceptable. It's
Yes.
just not.
Yes.
So don't wait till the summer.
Yes.
Start now, because we have legislators who are working on it now.
That's great. Thank you, Rep. Blvd. Thank you so much. And you never know, in the days ahead, you know, what if we see in our lifetime sort of the Underground Railroad for immigrants, you know? That is something that we have to be prepared for in these moments of mobilization. You know, we don't know. I mean, Hawaii seems like it's somewhat friendly, but we're seeing really what's happening unfold in the Big Island and rural areas. That, you know, we're seeing a lot of cruelty that we haven't seen before, and we also know that our islands are highly militarized. So there's already that sort of push for national security, push for anti-immigration, push. And so we as community members who care about life and the human spirit are going to have to, you know, be opening up our homes potentially and really being there to help one another. You know, as we've all learned from the horrific, you know, history lessons of Japanese internment, that we can't allow the government to allow us to play into the marginalization of the enemy by association. Really interrogate when that starts. It's happening now. It's going to continue to happen, and you know, those are just a few thoughts.
Well, I would add to that is why it's important to us is because it goes why I chose to make Hawaii my home is that strong sense of community, right? We are a small community, and that's one of the biggest, most beautiful things about these islands, right? And right now, our community members are suffering. They're being subject to inhumane treatment. I'm not even going to go into the stories of everything that has been happening over the past few weeks, but it is just sad. It is sad to see this happening, and it's even sadder to see, and as Salmah mentioned, whenever this comes up in conversation and people just brushing it off and just saying, oh no, serves them right. They have been here for 20 years and they haven't sought their citizenship. What? It's on them, which is just preposterous. Every single time I meet a person and that says that to me, I take 10 minutes of my day to educate that person and tell them how the system really works, how complex it is, and how some people don't even have the option available to them, nor will they ever have it. Even people who have U.S. citizen children, who have U.S. citizen parents, in some situations will never be able to obtain papers. So we must never forget this, lose perspective. Must not lose compassion, show compassion to our neighbors. You know, these individuals that are suffering are, you know, the parents of our children's classmates, our neighbors of 10 years, people that we have seen and that they contribute to our economy, to the richness of the culture, right? So I think that's one of the most important things that we must keep in mind, and why it's important to us, right? It's part of the identity, and part of the history, and we need to make sure that we honor that, and we honor, like Salmah said, all of us can trace to a certain point an immigrant in our families. I'm an immigrant myself. I was born in El Salvador. I came here when I was 22 years old. My mother's from El Salvador. My wife's parents, her grandma's from Italy, and eventually so immigration is such an inherent part of humanity, and we must acknowledge that, and we must embrace it. And as a community, I think it's important that we adopt that as part of our identity and fight that narrative that is being pushed. I think that is a lot of that responsibility falls on us as people, right? To make sure that doesn't become a prevalent, pervasive way of thinking here. right? And that we maintain that identity, right?
Thank you both. I want to take about 3 minutes just to give you an update as to some of the things that we are seeing currently here in Hawaii and why this might matter. We do have active Department of Homeland Security enforcement happening across the Pai'aina on every. I have not yet heard of Niihau or Lanai, but in all of our counties. And in fact, yesterday I was going to pick up my kids from preschool at the end of the day, was driving through Kaimuki and watched an action happening. There were 5 agents in their HSI jackets and several unmarked vehicles on 11th and Harding. And if I wasn't already pretty late to preschool pickup, they charge by the minute.
They charge by the minute, yeah.
And already, you know, that's a very short like on-ramp right there, you know, past the gas station. They were just past it. And so I called another immigration attorney and I said, do you have any clients in the area? And then I called some others, do you have any clients in the area? Anybody that we need to look out for? Because we're not saying that they can't do their job, but we would like to have our the attorneys present with the client if they are out there. This morning I woke up to a number of signal messages from Hawaiʻi Island, where there have been continued enforcement over the last couple of months. I had a picture of a broken door that had been kicked in from last night. And so far, we don't have any of the details. We know that 6 people were taken last night, that 2 were taken this morning. We don't know if there were any minors involved at this point in time, but we'll be getting more information from there. There is active enforcement here in Hawaii, and many times what we are seeing is that this is not necessarily happening under all of these constraints of due process, right? With your attorney present and the ability to make sure that you can talk to somebody, that you have been informed in a language that you understand, of your rights, of your right to decline an interview with an ICE agent, and all of these things are getting, you know, ridden over roughshod at this moment, and it's very difficult as an advocate, as an organizer, listening to our friends and fellow organizers in Hawaiʻi Island being like, but Liza, we did all the things, they didn't do it the right way. And who are we supposed to appeal that to, right? We take that further up. Maybe in a different administration, we would say, hey, come get your boys. They're acting out. They're not doing things the right way. But where are we supposed to go with that at this moment? So I picked up the kids, ran around, got them back to Kaimuki, pulled into the parking lot. But when you got 2 toddlers, nobody suspects you. And opened the door on my side as close as I could to the operation that was happening, and pretended to get their backpacks out, and so that I could just check and see what was going on, because we have a right to record what is happening in that time. Now, I didn't want my husband to be pissed at me for taking the kids into an active enforcement situation, so I stayed far enough away, but we were able to identify that there were a number of, that they were HSI agents. That's always an important thing. Which agencies, we want to know which agencies are being active in enforcement, because if I see the police there, then guess who's going to get a call? Chief Logan is going to get a call from me and say, what are you doing collaborating with DHS in this moment, and what does that relationship look like? Who asked who? Did you just decide to ride along, or what's going on here, Chief? And so we did also see some plainclothes agents, but that is to say, I'm sure many of you have seen a number of the articles about Hawaiʻi Island. ICE was active on Maui yesterday. We have been able to have a few more successes in getting attorneys to the place where they're looking to go pick somebody up. But specifically, the Homeland Security investigations, which is a part of ICE that normally doesn't do removal. They normally do, they are normally dealing with contraband and cybersecurity and other things, and not removal. But this is a whole of government approach. And so now they have been asked to participate. They are also the larger body of DHS here in Hawaii. So that's why I think we're also seeing them more than like ERO or CBP doing, or Customs and Border Patrol doing these operations. And one of the tasks that they have been given is that there's a list of 100 unaccompanied minors that they are supposed to find here in Hawaii. And those children, not every minor who is undocumented is an unaccompanied minor. They were children that presented themselves at the border, were identified and placed with a sponsor here, mostly in Hawaii, and now they are looking out for their welfare. So they're doing welfare checks. But as they're doing welfare checks, they have two different prerogatives, right? They are told by the federal administration, you need to tell us if these children are okay. And also, as you are out doing any of your job, anybody that you encounter, you need to investigate that person, and you need to remove every removable person. So this is the terrible situation that we're seeing oftentimes in Kona, is that they're looking for a child, and in the process of looking for that unaccompanied minor, they are encountering other folks that are oftentimes have been going through an asylum process, and maybe they have missed a notice to appear because our immigration court is on Oahu and it's expensive to fly from Kona and to get childcare and to maybe get a hotel and come over. And that is the unique challenges of the geography of our state. And so they have missed a court date and now they are removable. And all of a sudden we're in this terrible devolving situation where we all want to make sure that these children are safe and healthy and going to school. And at the same time, these communities are getting ripped apart. And people are fearful that they may have one of those child near them and that they are going to come hunting for them. And so this is something we are actively all trying to figure out. You really understand the strength of your network when you're in a situation like this and you call this person, call this person, call the Attorney General's office, let's figure it out. Can we get a notary there at 10 p.m.? And so we are rising up, and it's amazing attorneys that we need litigation. We need people in the courtroom fighting this case. And we need people like you, units of power, who care about these issues, asking for a meeting with the police chief. Have you ever met with the police chief? Good time to start. And say, what does that relationship look like? This is important to me. I want to know. One of the largest groups that we see deported are actually COFA migrants. COFA migrants are not deportable by status. But when they are convicted of a crime, they can become deportable. And many of us know that Micronesian folks and folks that are under COFA status are oftentimes, are policed more heavily than the rest of us. And so this is leading to part of that deportation pipeline. What have we done about it? This last session, we threw a bunch of things at the wall. We saw what was coming in Project 2025. We've made a bunch of bills. We were like, what if they want to make another detention camp? So we had a bill about not allowing the feds for more state and county land to build a detention camp. We had a bill about this cooperation with the police. Fortunately, in the many meetings that we've had with our different police chiefs, we have found so far, at this moment in time, they said they are not collaborating, and we were able to see that through the data. And so we will keep holding on to that. We had another bill called the Truth Act to make sure that when folks are, if they are arrested by the police and the police is holding them and ICE wants to interview them in a jail, that they are Mirandized, so you have the right to remain silent, in a language that they understand, and told of their right to decline an interview with ICE. We also had a bill, as you have heard, due process, due process, due process. What does that mean? Being able to go to court, to go and stand in front of a judge. You know what you need to do that? You need one of these guys with you. Because if you are a 6-year-old whom English is your second language, you have no business standing in a court on your own trying to defend yourself in front of an ICE judge. But even though you have the right to have an attorney, you are not given an attorney when you go through immigration court. And so one thing that our legislator, thanks Rep. Blvd, that has been able to do, and why we're counting it a half success this session, is that there was unprecedented money put in the state budget to support our pro bono legal services, to make sure that folks that are detained here in Hawaii do get to have an attorney standing by them when they are going through that process. So my units of power out there, one thing that you can do, go, bug Chief Logan, see what he's about, see what he's interested in doing, and make sure, as I've said, we are in the pot, but the water is not hot yet. And they are going to keep turning up the heat, putting incentives for police chiefs to sign agreements to deputize their ICE agents. It's called a 287G agreement. They are going to apply sticks and say, if you don't do this, we're going to take this money away from you. This pressure is coming. So they need to feel equal pressure from folks in our community to say, we will not abide you putting on an ICE jacket and detaining and deporting our neighbors. You have a job to do, and that's to keep everybody safe. It is not to separate families. Next thing you can do is, we are already starting on legislation, but even though we just ended this session, a call from you to your legislator on why we didn't do anything on immigration would certainly be sweet. So think about it. Think about that. We're gonna open up the mic for questions, and if nobody has questions, I also received questions from you, but I will give priority to living questions in the room.
Thank you. And I wanted to thank you, Liza. I mean, you're the energy that you bring to this work and the way that you mobilize and just, the spirit that you are bringing to this work and to getting everybody on board, and just, through phone calls, through meeting people, the bills that came through, we saw them through ACLU, we supported them. It was great that, one of them had, made it to the end. The last few months have just kicked it into high gear, and with your little babies too, and just I know everyone in the community is really appreciative of you and HCIR for holding together so much in this moment. Can we give a round of applause real quickly to Liza? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. For you, sir.
Hi, excuse me. My name's Thomas. My question's a big picture legal one. The Constitution doesn't explicitly give the judicial branch the power of judicial review, right? That was taken unilaterally by Marbury versus Madison in 1803. Is that correct?
I'm not
Okay.
Let me call on my legal fellow Aaron if you can unpack that question a little bit.
I can.
Oh, okay. Okay, so you're...
Well, let me state it a different way.
Let's
That's
do
my
it a different
impression that
Okay.
the right of judicial review is not like in plain English in the Constitution. So I'm asking, and I've heard people talk about this on political television. If you don't know about that, then my question might be moot. How much of a vulnerability is that? The fact that, could they challenge that? Could MAGA and the Project 2025 people use that as another crack in the wall?
Well, so I think, the question you're asking requires a little bit more context, but I think, there was recently a case when examining the Aliens Enemy Act that went to the Supreme Court. I think I have the case name here. And the Supreme Court said that the president is able to potentially, use the Aliens Enemy Act, but we don't have judicial review at this time. It needs to be seen in a habeas corpus petition. So then it went back to the Texas court that did have judicial review of that particular question. And so, what court and what proceeding has judicial review or can engage certain legal questions is very complicated, and it rests a lot on the question of jurisdiction. And so I think in that moment when that happened, and Trump, there was another case where Trump said, I'm going to impeach this judge for, finding this ruling against me. And in a rare occurrence, very rare occurrence, Chief Justice Roberts said to the media, because again, judges are not talking to the media at this moment. I just did a panel with a judge a few weeks ago, and some of these hot topic questions were asked, and he just kept his mouth shut because he might face those questions in the course of his litigation. He wouldn't have to want to recuse himself or fear jeopardizing his position of neutrality. So Chief Justice Roberts came out in a rare moment and said, President Trump, in this moment, impeaching a judge is not really the right, like I caution, like really the right course of action in this moment is to appeal a decision that you disagree with, you know, and that is, I think for somebody who, you know, for a president who may have his, you know, is used to getting everything that he wants and has a lot of privilege and a lot of money, you know, sometimes folks that don't get what they want just want to, it's like my way or the highway. So these judges that disagree with me, let me, you know, nix them. But that's not that's not what we're living in. So the Supreme Court has stepped in, and you can see, despite the positionality of the Supreme Court, and I think many people would agree that it's conservative leaning, and many people, you know, members of the court are going to just automatically agree with President Trump, we're screwed. I think I would have a little bit more faith and have a little bit more hope in their ability to really stick to the law, and at least when it comes to what's reviewable, what's appealable, what comes to them. They're kicking things back because they don't want to make a decision prematurely just to support the president. Like you said, MAGA and President Trump are trying to bypass some of that, but it's not working so far, I think.
Yeah, and what I would add to that too is, well, very complex question. I think that at first I didn't understand the context under which you were asking it, and then it became a little bit clear. So I think that's one of the beautiful things about the U.S. legal system is also at the same time another that in certain context, and perhaps especially now, provides a lot of vulnerability, right? That other nations that have perhaps more modern constitutions that have already anticipated all these different things that can develop over time, they provide more protection and they strengthen the checks and balances system. Right now, your question is actually a very good one, right? Like, is this really something that is firm on solid ground? Is there some possibility that this might be attacked? And I think if you had asked me this question 2 years ago, I would have had a little bit more faith. But right now, my answer to you is I don't know.
Andrea.
Hi. So I was just wondering, and this is maybe thinking down the road a little bit, but if we follow this path of we're at war with TDA, is there a path forward, either federally or internationally, to charge the president or administration with war crimes, crimes against humanity, anything like that?
Well, the problem with international law is that there's really no effective enforcement on the major nations that are part of the United Nations Security Council. And so you've already seen, it's going to be extremely difficult. That's why you never see sort of U.S. war criminals going to The Hague. And there's a critique that international law is just in place to criminalize the global south, the poorer leaders, the poorer countries that don't. But the way in which our system kind of works and is stacked is that the United States always has certain veto powers within the United Nations Security Council. United Nations Security Council is the only body that can enforce and get blue helmets on the ground to really try to prevent something from happening that is against international humanitarian law. But, the United States is always going to use its hand to veto, any kind of enforcement against itself. So.
Thank you. I understood, probably not likely, but I was just curious if that's sort of path forward to that. Thank you.
John?
I think a counter-argument that seems to resonate with a lot of people who support, or at least just shrug off the administration policies on this, is that these nice ideals and procedures of due process were a product of a different time. That have now become impractical in the current crisis. So I'm wondering how valid that is. If there's a wave of progressive Democrats who take over the House and the Senate by 2027, impeach Trump, impeach Vance, and move House Speaker AOC up to become president. Would we be facing a situation in which due process, as we are currently envisioning it, really clogs the courts for years and years and years? People have to wait 10 years for their trials. I'm presuming that's a bogeyman argument, but I'd really like to hear from you about it.
That is a very, very good question. How I would like to answer this is you're absolutely correct in the sense that if the situation stays as it is, and I think Salmah said this before, this is nothing new. The situation has evolved over time, and it all comes and boils down to the fact that there has been a need for immigration reform for decades, and it hasn't happened. This so-called crisis of people coming in without following or applying for the processes, it happens because we as a country have not afforded the mechanisms to allow these individuals to immigrate in a way that makes sense to them and forces them to put their lives at risk, put their children's lives at risk because they're escaping horrible situations, and it's understandable from a human perspective. But at the same time, that is, if a person was afforded the opportunity to apply for a process and come to this country, I guarantee you they would. And the reason they don't is because there is a lack of willingness from both aisles, I would say, over the past 30 years to actually create meaningful reform that will allow to have an influx of immigrants to the level that the country needs it, because the country needs immigrants. We need to fill those positions. We need to respond to a certain level of needs in terms of production of a law that was created 50, 40, 30 years ago. How much has the population grown since then? How much has the industry grown? How much more food do we need in production? And we are not allowing the workers to come here legally. We're not allowing an effective asylum system to allow these individuals who are escaping situations of threat to their lives to come here. That is why the situation is in the state that it is. I guarantee you that if we had a revision of the number of immigrant visas that are assigned to people who we need to come here, these individuals would not be clogging out the judicial system because they would be obtaining lawful status by means of other ways. But we have not made that a priority, and that is where I think the focus needs to. Once we are outside of the immigration crisis that we currently are right now, that should be the next approach, and we need to make sure that it becomes a priority, right? Because what we have done is focusing on making immigrants the enemy, and that has the approach that the administration has taken. But we cannot lose sight of the fact that we not only need immigrants here, but we need to provide them with a system that allows them to come here.
Given that we did screw things up, would it be right now a catastrophe in terms of trying to actually implement new process?
Well, I mean, there's definitely, yes, we need more judges. So the system would need to be bolstered, right, to be able to. But at the same time, we are right now, I think, there's this false impression that if it's going to be opening the floodgates, and no, like the system has maintained a certain pace, right, and it continues to do that. Obviously, every year it gets worse because, you know, wait times get longer. Like right now, for a U.S. citizen to petition for their sibling, it takes 20 years for them to get their green card. So who in their right minds is going to stay back in Honduras where their families are being harassed and threatened by gangs and going to wait, oh yeah, I'm going to wait 20 years until my sister is able to petition me? No, that's not. So for me, it's going to be two levels, right? On the one hand, we have to modernize the Immigration and Nationality Act to allow the number of immigrants that we should be supporting to come in through different pathways. And that, of course, is going to have an effect on the judicial because it's going to reduce the number of individuals that end up in the court system to begin with. And then on the second part, we also need to hire more judges to make sure that they're able to manage the dockets and move the cases forward, because otherwise we're just going to continue adding and adding and adding and adding to the backlog. That's a great question.
Nandita?
Hi, thank you so much for all of your insights and knowledge on this topic. And I just want us to talk about what may seem obvious, but I think we need to really understand this much more clearly. Why is it immigrants, right? Why is it immigrants who are facing, you know, masked men and women in civilian clothes with no badges and no ID, and they're picking them up off the street, or they're breaking into their homes, or they're breaking into their cars? Why immigrants? I think we really need to tackle that political issue, right? And I think that if we are unable to recognize that it may start with immigrants, but it's not going to end with immigrants, we're in very, very deep trouble. And I know that particularly the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case has elevated the discourse so that we can actually see injustice, right? But for all of the other thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people that are being affected, we still have a very, very strong anti-immigrant politics in the United States and here in Hawaii, right?
Yes.
We have a very, very strong anti-immigrant politics. So I think what I am interested in hearing from you is what are we going to do about that? Because this is, as you all have mentioned, this is a structural problem, right? It has absolutely been intensified by the Trump administration, and the anti-immigrant politics can lead us into fascism, right? But it is also a structural problem, right? It's not just from this administration. It is every administration going back to 1875, which was the first immigration law, right? So I think one of the questions that we need to ask ourselves is, who gives us the right to determine who moves on this planet, right? Why do we need to believe that our home is inside a nation or inside a nation state? Why can't we think bigger? Because if we are not going to allow ourselves to think bigger and we're going to be contained in these institutions that are designed to kill immigrants, we are always going to be in this mess. And we're always going to open the door to fascists because they're going to exploit this hatred that nationalism fosters against migrants. So would you mind talking about that?
Sure. Yeah. I know we're at time though, Liza. So is it okay if I?
Yeah,
Yeah.
1
Okay.
minute,
So
yeah.
that is such a layered question, Professor. But you know, as Omar, as you were talking, I think it's important to realize that just as few resources that are given to a migrant who's coming to this country to allow them to succeed and allow them to get their papers and let them be empowered and bring them into our system with opening and like welcoming arms, the depletion of those resources in our nation helping to welcome immigrants, that much and much more resources are being put to ensure that immigrants are let out of the system, right? So when it comes to due process, I've dealt with BIA attorneys on the other end, or I've dealt with DOJ attorneys at the appellate level. And the painstaking resources that they invest in to let one little asylum seeker make sure that they fail, make sure that they don't get in here, the amount of work that goes into that one litigative proceeding, it's like, why are you spending so much money? Just let this guy stay, right? So it is a system thing. Like when you're talking about, oh, like, isn't it too burdensome? Don't we not have the resources to give everybody due process? The floodgates argument, it's not true. Don't let them believe that it's true. There are plentiful resources, but they're being put in a xenophobic project, an anti-immigrant project. Our system is not welcoming of immigrants. And the reason why is, I think, you know, from a cultural anthropologist lens, I think my husband just left, is that we are still, I mean, President Trump, I feel like, embodies this last vestige of holding on to white America, right? The quintessential white American man. And really, it's the face of that poor immigrant child that is a threat to that sort of culture. You know, if we think about history, we're just a couple generations removed from lynchings in the South, where white children were, you know, celebrating and having popcorn and soda to see the dismemberment of black bodies. You know, that is people's grandparents that are alive today were drinking that soda and popcorn. And we asked, like, we're not so far removed. Like, there is still innate racism that is mixed with innate xenophobia. And there is so much right now. It's just like this last hold because you know, us immigrants, we like to make babies, and we're going to take over. So, but we do have to change the narrative. You know, we do have to provide space of empowerment and normalize this, and you know, normalize, and not even just normalize, but really build spaces for acceptance of diversity, and knowing that like the fabric of our nation is changing, you know.
And to that end, with climate change, we will see much more migration.
Yes,
we are
yeah.
already seeing migration, and things like the fire in Maui is climate migration that is internally displaced people who have left Maui who now live someplace else. Maybe they went to another country, but they're IDPs. So in like the parlance, they're internally displaced now.
Yes.
And so we will see much, much more of this. And my concern is not just that we stop this right now, but that we build a structure that is going to be able to handle the level of migration that we are going to see in the very near future due to climate change and places becoming unlivable. One issue back to Kona, where many of the Central Americans that are in Kona that are picking coffee were no longer in their home country picking coffee because of climate change. And it has disrupted their ability to grow coffee there. So they're in the only state in the United States that grows coffee, and they're picking coffee here. And it has gotten so bad now that we may not be able to bring in the coffee harvest in Kona this year, because there are not enough workers and people are afraid to come and pick coffee. And so these are the consequences. I'm like, so like my mind is boggled when we're talking about removing all these people, because we are millions of workers short.
Yes.
In America.
Yes.
And we have an
Yeah.
aging population, and we need a care economy. And I just go, where do you think these people are going to come from? So anyways, Carolyn.
Yeah. One, I just really want to encourage you guys to tell the stories. Yeah. That people in Hawaii need to hear the stories. It's the stories of actual people that move people. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, that when people hear the stories, you're going to have more resistance from the people. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about Claire Hannes, who some of the people in this room know. When she had cases in court she called on people to come out there and stand outside, call their names, raise money together to get their bail together. And on the spot, we could raise $3,000-$4,000 just in a minute with some of the people I know that are in this room. And I think that kind of community support and resistance is desperately needed. I mean, today I was really happy to see people in Kentucky blocking the immigration, and they couldn't get somewhere because people were all blocking them. Yeah. And I think we're going to just have to really, you know, have a lot more courage and stand up for immigrants while also telling their stories, because right now they're just being demonized, and there aren't enough voices telling what's actually happening. And I want to thank Liza for getting it in like Civil Beat and talking about it there and trying to popularize it, and so that when you see these, get it to other people, because too many people are just buying this shit, that this is just people who are doing bad things, so therefore they need to be removed. And that's still the common and I think prevalent thing here, even though most families have an immigrant that they actually see as different than that. Yeah. So I really want to encourage you to invite everybody to stand up for these people, to stand up against what the system is doing. And my question actually when I was coming up here was not that at all. It was about birthright citizenship, yes, which is going to be heard in the Supreme Court on the 15th. And so I think that we have to be really vigilant about what that means too, in addition to the immigration issues that we've talked about tonight. And that's a watershed moment in the courts, how that citizenship, birthright citizenship is decided. And I want to encourage everybody here to find out about it. If you don't know about it, find out what's at stake and resist. Resist in every way you can. We're a long ways from Washington, D.C., so we won't be in front of the Supreme Court. but we need to make sure that everybody here knows what's on the line. Thanks.
Thanks, Carolyn. Okay, do we have one more, or we're all good? Marie? Okay.
Thank you all. I have a quick question, about the Federal Tort Claims Act. So about this, is there any cases in your mind you can help the immigrant to using this act to sue the government or at least get certain justice back? So do you mind?
Okay. Yeah.
It's
yeah.
about
So,
the
so
Federal
the federal,
Tort
yeah,
Claims Act.
that's usually used in civil kind of proceedings.
Yeah.
And what we're looking at with a lot of these enforcement actions is you have federal kind of bodies. And so we use sort of, I think, the stronger mechanisms rather than the Federal Torts Act, is really just to use the constitutional protections that already exist in the Constitution. Whether that, and I know we're just starting our nascent immigrant rights program now at the ACLU, and we are looking at, of course, due process, but also some creative Fourth Amendment search and seizure arguments. Like, how can we look at what's happening right now, excessive force arguments, because when we come against the government and what it's acting, that's not traditionally thought of. I don't want to say that there have been, I think that there have been unique cases that have called upon federal torts, but usually we are using other kind of tools in the toolkit.
Thank you. Because usually immigrants has no awareness or consciousness about these constitutional rights or protect these immigrants. Maybe they are not finished the whole processing for the immigration, so they are even not a green card holder. So will they be protected by this?
Yes,
constitutional rights?
the majority of civil and constitutional rights apply with equal force to people who are residing in the United States. Because imagine for a second that the United States, you're standing here and, Liza, I'm police. Yeah. I'm going to treat you one way because you're a citizen, but you're not a citizen. I'm going to smack you around. Where would that, we're just going to, so a lot of constitutional protections apply with equal force, and that's why we say immigrant rights are civil rights, and so I think that's a message we need to get out to the community. It doesn't matter if you don't have papers. It doesn't matter if you're here legally or not. You still have critical, base level protections. Our U.S. government can't just abuse you as it wants to. And that's why the Alien Enemies Act was so dangerous, because it did provide an authority to export people without due process in an emergency for wartime. That doesn't exist, So, please. And we have a number of trainings on this too. For example, we just did a Know Your Rights workshop on the free speech of immigrants. Thank you, Liza, for coordinating that, but so much, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Marie, do you have one we're 10 minutes over.
It's a quick question, and I believe a good ending question, I hope, which is, what else can we do besides the things that were discussed here? Is there anything else we can do to move this forward in a good way, maybe to work with legal advocates, those of us who are not attorneys? That's my question.
So Marie's question just about what we can do. I will say we are, HCIR is trying to organize by county folks that want to be a part of a rapid response, both for power, to develop power to push on the legislature and the county, but also to address the specific needs of folks that are on the ground as they arise. And so, yes, Marie, and then I'm sure that Lisa is going to tell us about the next thing that we can do to keep this ball rolling.
Yeah, and ACLU is over there, and Sergio is our new Director of Community Engagement. So we're re-upping, hopefully this year, our field operations.
Awesome.
And making sure that we do have people. So if you're not a card-holding member of the ACLU, please become one. Just go to aclu.org, become a member of National. We're a federated organization, and then you'll automatically become a member of us. And we send community engagement updates like submit testimony on this, or do this, or pack the court, And so please become an ACLU member on your way out if you haven't yet.
I was just going to say, on June 14th, No King's Day. That's the next big one. Ezra and Leah just announced that. He was just on Rachel Maddow. So get ready for that. It's going to be across the state. Indivisible has 12 different chapters. Show up. You have the power. You can take the power. Our elected officials work for us. We pay their salaries. So that's 6 weeks from now. Also, should some nastiness happen that's nastier than what has been happening, there could be a rapid response notice going out. I would ask all of you, when these things happen, to amplify them to your, if you're in an organization, amplify the call to action within your organization and amplify it with your friends and family to show up. And Indivisible, as I say, we will have these events all over the state. We are the barrier right now. Thank you.
Mahalo.
IndivisibleHawaii.org.
Okay, so your dates are May 22nd. We're going to have a Know Your Rights if you're focused on COFA folks, or if you're interested in that, or have folks in your life that would be interested. June 14th with Indivisible, No King's Day, and then June 20th and back here at Harris. And one more, Carolyn?
Yeah, on May 17th.
Okay.
There's another demonstration at the state capitol at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Bring your own signs, any organizations, join us, put up your own table. Let's make it like something the entire community can come to.
Mahalo, Carolyn. And mahalo to all of you for coming out and spending 2 hours and 20 minutes listening to us. It's been a pleasure, and thank you, Omar and Salmah. Mahalo to both of you for spending your time. I know it's very, very precious these days. It's not the last that you'll see of us. Aloha.
Aloha. Liza, should we get a quick photo?
Yeah.
So that if I'm driving by in my car and I see something going down, and that would trigger all of you